Hey everybody, it's Jason Blaha here with Juggernaut Fitness TV. And today I want to talk to you guys very briefly about saturated fat. Someone asked me on the Facebook fan page a couple days ago, and this is someone who is actually a vegetarian like myself. They asked me, are there any health benefits to consuming saturated fat? And the answer to that is yes, there are. Now you need to remember that saturated fat is non-essential, meaning that your body can produce it on its own, so it isn't required that you get it through your diet. But it is one of those things that oftentimes people give it a bad rap for obvious reasons, and then other people tend to say you should eat massive amounts of it, and both extremes are incorrect. It's one of those foods that if you consume too much of it, it absolutely has some potential negatives on your health and your lifespan. If you consume too little of it, it has some negative effects potentially on your health. Now, what happens if your saturated fat intake goes way too low and you're not consuming it in any form or very, very tiny amounts of it? It can compromise immune function a bit. In some people, not everyone, but in some people it can. That's one of your concerns. The other big concern is that having almost none of it in your diet can negatively affect hormone production, particularly sex hormones like testosterone in both men and women, which will affect things like your muscle gain. It will affect your mood. It will affect your sex drive. Now, some people drop it very low and don't seem to have issues with it, and others will drop it too low and they'll see a major change in their sex hormones. So it's really individual, and I don't think there's a way for you to really predict that. But that being said, it would be unwise for you to completely avoid all saturated fat, particularly since it occurs even in a large number of plant sources and in moderate or low amounts, and in some in very high amounts like coconut. Now, the obvious problems with it is that if your intake of it becomes excessive, it is a very pro-inflammatory fat. You will notice problems with inflammation. It can, if your intake of it is too high, negatively affect things like insulin sensitivity, which in turn can predispose you to diabetes, cardiovascular risk, and other things. Now, the NHS here in the UK where I live recommends it for the average male, you don't exceed 30 grams of it a day, and for the average female, the limit should be around 20 grams a day. But the majority of people both here in the UK and the United States actually exceed that intake by a large amount. And when you start exceeding that intake, it's not necessarily causation, but there is certainly a fair amount of correlational data around the world to suggest that this can affect a number of medical conditions and health problems, particularly things related to inflammation and insulin sensitivity, as well as things such as colon cancer and health of your GI tract. So it is cause for concern in excess, but like with anything else, moderate intake of it is not harmful, and it's not going to harm your health, and it's certainly not going to even harm your body composition if you're an athlete or a bodybuilder. All right, guys, but that's really all I have to say on that today. I hope it's been informative, and I will talk to you next time. But let me give you guys a bicep shot before I go.